Imagine, just imagine sending your kids off to school, a day like any other, right? But then tragedy strikes. And that's exactly what's been unfolding in Gauteng, South Africa. It's a
Mm.
string of food poisoning incidents, and it's left these communities reeling.
Absolutely devastating.
Multiple incidents we're talking about here, tons of children hospitalized, and even worse, the loss of young lives.
It's just heartbreaking.
And what makes this even more chilling is how it all started. I
Yeah.
mean, these were seemingly ordinary snacks, the kind kids buy from street vendors all the time, a parent's worst nightmare.
Absolutely.
So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack all the details. We're going to try to understand what exactly happened. So what made these snacks so dangerous? Well, it started as a mystery, but soon a disturbing culprit emerged: organophosphate.
Organophosphate, and this is for anyone who might not be familiar, is incredibly toxic. It's the active ingredient in a lot of rat poisons.
We're talking rat poison, and it's ending up in the hands of children. Unbelievable. And I think the most jarring example comes from Bronkhorst Spruit. 25 school children were poisoned there after buying snacks from a street vendor.
Oh, it's awful.
They experienced, these agonizing symptoms. We're talking itching, stomach cramps, the works. It's just awful to think about. And tragically, 5 of those children didn't survive.
And what makes organophosphate so dangerous, especially for young children, is that it directly affects the nervous system.
Oh, wow.
And this, can lead to a whole cascade of these really horrible symptoms. And children, because they have smaller bodies, their systems are still developing, they're just so much more vulnerable to these effects.
It's unimaginable, the pain that these children, these families had to endure. And the thing is, this Bronkhorst Spruit case, as horrifying as it is, it's not an isolated incident. We also have reports from Hammanskraal. They were selling contaminated chocolates there, Naledi.snacks, from a spaza shop.
Yeah.
And I should probably explain what a spaza shop is for our listeners outside of South Africa. It's like a kind of convenience store, very common in townships.
Yeah.
And then even more cases in Sakane and Vosloorus, this time with biscuits and chips. So it really does paint a very bleak picture.
Yeah, and what's really unsettling is that figuring out the exact source of contamination in these cases is often a huge challenge.
Really?
Because it might not even be the food itself that was initially tainted.
Oh,
It could be cross-contamination, like unsanitary surfaces, or maybe the poison somehow entered the supply chain somewhere along the line.
right. So it could be so many things.
Exactly. It's very hard to pinpoint.
So it's like this puzzle, but crucial pieces are missing. And this is where, unfortunately, the story takes even darker turn. Because in these townships, we're finding out that organophosphate is being sold illegally under the name halafirimi. And oftentimes, people don't even know what they're buying, which is terrifying.
And that's precisely the issue. This whole unregulated market makes this dangerous substance so easily accessible. And that's just a recipe for disaster, especially when people are completely unaware of the risks involved.
It's terrifying to even consider.
It really is.
And one doctor who's really been at the forefront of this tragedy, Dr. Jerry Chaka, he stressed how urgently we need to act. He said,
Yeah.
we need to educate our communities. Action needs to be taken. We need to identify where it comes from, the main seller. A real call to action.
Absolutely. We need everyone on board.
These incidents have really exposed, I think, a critical gap in our food safety net.
Yes.
It demands our attention.
Yes. Immediately.
But in the midst of all the investigations, all these urgent calls for change, we can't overlook the deeply personal impact. We can't forget about the families who are hurting. I keep thinking about these parents who have lost their children. 6-year-old Rafilo, for instance, died after eating biscuits.
Awful.
Little Othalive, also only 6 years old, he bought snacks at a taxi rank. And as in Case, who was just 2, these are children, with their whole lives ahead of them. Their lives were cut tragically short.
And it's these personal stories that really force us to confront these uncomfortable truths about food security in our society. Who's most vulnerable? What systems are in place to protect them? And are they working? These tragedies really make us question are certain communities, especially those with less, bearing a heavier burden.
It makes you wonder.
It really does.
And it's easy to focus on the individual stories. And as heartbreaking as they are, these are just a fraction of the problem, right? Because it's a reminder to all of us that food safety, it's not just about the choices we make as individuals. It's about the systems that are supposed to be in place to protect us.
Right, and this is a much bigger issue. To give you an idea, between February and September of this year, just those 7 months, Gauteng had 203 recorded cases of food poisoning.
Wow.
And 6 of those, as we've discussed, were fatal
203 cases.
in 7 months.
That's shocking. And it makes you wonder, how could this happen? Like, are there not enough resources dedicated to stopping this from happening?
It's a critical question, and if we take a look at the resources, there's a really troubling pattern that emerges.
Okay.
So if you look at Soweto, for example, a very large, very densely populated area in Gauteng, they have 16 health inspectors,
16.
and they are responsible for making sure food is safe across 19 wards.
16 inspectors for 19 wards. That seems like an impossible job.
It's a huge workload.
So are they actually able to keep track of every single vendor, every single spaza shop, every place that sells food, especially in a place that big?
That's the thing. It highlights a systemic challenge because with so few resources, it becomes incredibly difficult to make sure that inspections are happening regularly and thoroughly enough, especially when you're thinking about places where street food and informal businesses are so common.
So these areas are just more vulnerable because there's not enough oversight.
And this lack of oversight is creating the perfect environment for these tragedies to occur.
It comes back to that vulnerability again, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It seems like if communities, certain communities, don't have access to those resources, like enough health inspectors or clear information about what halofremi even is, they're at a much higher risk.
You've hit the nail on the head. This really exposes that inequity,
Right.
where certain communities are just bearing a heavier burden.
So we've uncovered a lot in Gauteng. We've got this easily accessible, toxic chemical wreaking havoc, and not enough resources to track and prevent these poisonings from happening. We need to come at this from all sides, don't we?
It's not enough to just react after the fact. We need a totally different approach to food safety.
Okay, so what does that look like? What needs to change?
Well, for one, we've got to make it much harder for these chemicals to get into the wrong hands in the first place.
So stricter regulations on the sale of organophosphates.
Exactly. Cut it off at the source. But it can't just be about laws, can it?
Right, because even if it's illegal, people need to understand how dangerous halofremi is.
Education is key. People need to be able to protect themselves. They need clear information. What are the risks? How do you even know if you're buying it? How do you stay safe?
Empowering those communities. But we talked earlier about how there just aren't enough health inspectors. So even with education, that needs to be addressed too, right?
Absolutely. We can't just talk about it. We need more boots on the ground.
More inspectors, more often.
Exactly. Making sure those businesses are following the rules, especially those spaza shops. They need guidance, too, to keep things safe.
So it sounds like it's about stricter regulations, education for the public, and more support for our health services, all of that working together.
Exactly. Hitting it from every angle. But, and this is important, it's not all on the government or these bigger systems. We all have a role to play.
What can everyday people do? What can we do in our communities to be more proactive?
Knowledge is power, right? Talk to your friends and family. Let them know how dangerous this chemical is. Support the organizations already working on this. The more people who are aware, the better we can protect each other.
It's terrifying. This whole situation really highlights just how important food safety is. It's not someone else's job. It's up to all of us.
It's a shared responsibility, and we all need to do our part. Be informed, be vigilant.
This deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've seen some uncomfortable truths about just how vulnerable our food systems can be, especially for certain communities.
That's heartbreaking.
But we've also seen how much power we have when we work together, when we're informed and ready to act.
That's what it comes down to, taking action. What happened is tragic, but we can learn from it. We can make a difference, make a future where this doesn't happen again.
It's a call to action for all of us, and it makes you wonder, are we willing to step up? And that's something for all of us to think about. This is the deep dive. Asking the tough questions, diving deep into the issues that matter.